This is the kind of film that only comes around once every decade, or at least that's what I thought after watching The Odyssey 3 times in 3 different formats. Christopher Nolan has taken one of the oldest story ever written and somehow made it feel both ancient and modern. It's an adaptation of Homer's epic poem, but more than that, it's an interpretation, one that somehow makes this mythical journey feel like real history. I watched it in IMAX 70mm, in IMAX laser projection, and standard digital because I really wanted to know whether this really is the kind of film that demands the biggest screen possible. So, is it really the masterpiece people are calling it? Hey, my name is Alex, and if you're new to the channel, I talk about films and TV in a more conversational way. The goal is pretty simple, to help you decide whether something deserves your cinema ticket, your streaming subscription, or just a couple of hours of your life. We're looking at The Odyssey today. This is a spoiler-free review, so let's get into it. Now let's get one thing out of the way. This is pure event cinema. The sheer scale of this film is very rarely seen these days. From adapting one of the most important, if not the most important pieces of literature ever written, to the real locations, the practical effects, the technology, the performances, everything feels like you're witnessing something that people will talk about for decades. And the story here is the timeless one. After the Trojan War, Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, faces a dangerous voyage back to Ithaca, encountering the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and the Sirens, and Calypso, and many of the other dangers that we know about from the poem. Now, that's the official synopsis and only the surface of what this film is really about. It's also what the poem is about, but Nolan's film goes much further. It's in an almost like a miraculous way. It makes this world feel like a genuine historical reconstruction of a turbulent period in human history. And we know there is very little historical evidence surrounding the Trojan War itself, but somehow the creatures from the poem look and behave with such realism here that they become genuinely terrifying. Now, as I mentioned, I watched this film in 3 different formats, in IMAX 70mm, IMAX laser projection in 2K resolution, and the standard digital screening. Now, my recommendation is simple. If you can see it in IMAX, do it. The 70mm experience is still the definitive way to watch this, to experience it more, better said. If you're someone who watches a lot of films in cinemas like I do, then this analog version will be an absolute feast for the eyes. You will notice the film grain, the slight stutter, the occasional softness and imperfections that remind you that you're watching something projected on film rather than digital images. But there's only three true IMAX 70mm cinemas in the UK, and I think there's about 25 across the US. So most people simply won't have the option to watch that big format. So, with that in mind, I honestly think that a good IMAX laser presentation still does the film justice because the color, the scale, and immersion come very close to the 70mm. So I wouldn't recommend I wouldn't hesitate recommending that version. And the reason this matters is because this film lives and breathes atmosphere. The real locations create breathtaking wide shots that constantly make you stop and simply look at the screen. Then the action sequences are enormous in scale, yet Christopher Nolan, in his own genius way, keeps you emotionally connected to the characters through every fight and chase and makes you really root for them. Obviously, that's due to the performances too. But most impressively, so much of this, what you're seeing on screen, is achieved in camera. The first of all, the cinematography is simply astonishing. Probably the cinematography of the year. Hoyte van Hoytema delivers what it is for me the best cinematography so far in the year. Although I haven't seen Dune 3 yet, that's coming. Some of these landscapes in the Odyssey, though, genuinely look like classical paintings brought to life. But let's talk about Nolan's interpretation of the story, because his Odyssey is an adaptation of the epic poem by Homer, but like every adaptation of an ancient oral tradition, it's ultimately an interpretation, because there isn't one definitive version of the Odyssey. There isn't even a written version from 3,000 years ago when this is supposedly been told. There is only surviving text patched together in countless way and reinterpreted by artists over a span of nearly 3,000 years. And that gives Nolan an enormous creative freedom, but thankfully he remains faithful to the heart of the story while grounding it in a remarkable sense of realism. His Odysseus is fundamentally a military commander suffering from post traumatic stress disorder after the Trojan War. The gods barely intervene in his journey, which makes everything feel even more grounded. So, the characters of Athena or Calypso, and especially Circe, which is played by Samantha Norton, they all feel like real people rather than these mythical beings as they are in the poem. And besides the creatures themselves, there is almost no magic or supernatural spectacle. And because we're following a man deeply traumatized by war, Nolan quietly raises the question, which is very interesting. The question would be, are these mythical creatures exactly as they appear? Or could they be manifestations of a damaged mind desperately trying to justify the horrors it has witnessed in order to survive the journey home? That's the sign of great writing. Not only does Odysseus struggle with trauma that feels incredibly modern, but Nolan also strips away many of the nested stories within a story and episodic diversions that you find in the poem, which has some 12,000 lines, I believe. So that way, Nolan creates something far more focused without losing that emotional core that we find in the book too, in the poem too. And finally, let's talk about the performances. You'll hear plenty about this cast during the award season, I'm sure, but two performances completely stole the film for me. Samantha Norton as Circe, and Elliot Page, who plays two versions of the soldier Sinon. Now, Samantha Norton is extraordinary. She only has around 10 minutes of screen time, and every second is unforgettable. She's completely transformational. She creates a character that radiates intelligence but also menace and absolute danger. I won't spoil any of it, but it's something you need to experience yourself. Those 10 minutes are pure bliss to just watch her navigate the screen and command the screen in such a way. Elliot Page is equally impressive. Especially there's a later scene that is pure masterclass in acting, considering there's not a lot of moving around. It's just his face and what he tells Odysseus. So it's obvious I was completely floored by this film, to be honest, every single time I watched it. So my recommendation won't surprise anyone. Go and see it on the biggest screen you can possibly can. Even if that means traveling a couple hours to your nearest IMAX screen, I generally think it's worth it. Just make a day out of it, maybe. And for me, this is the masterpiece of the year. It's the kind of film people will one day talk about alongside the grand and great cinematic epics like Lawrence of Arabia, Spartacus, or Akira Kurosawa's Run. And what an incredible time to witness filmmaking at this level. I'll see you next time.